We're going to get started tonight. I just want to introduce our tonight's speaker, who you probably already know, which is probably why you're here. He's pretty fabulous and a man about town. I just learned that he is in a band. He has his own band. It's called Archaea. So I'm looking forward to going out and seeing it. But when he isn't rocking out, we know that he is rocking out in the natural landscape. Dr. Tyler Bassett is an ecologist working with Michigan Natural Features Inventory since 2018, and his focus is on the ecology of natural landscapes, of natural communities, and the plant species that they support. Without any further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and, no more ado, this is it. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Tyler Bassett.
People mention it. Cool. Let me turn this guy on. Hello, everybody. Let's see how this is. That picks up the sound pretty good. Hang on a sec here. New password today. It gets confusing. I am going to connect to the VPN because sometimes things don't work otherwise. Cool. As you can see, I work for MSU Extension. We've addressed that. You can do it. It's doing it. There we go. Cool. We're in action. Okay, so I guess the title is "What Does It Mean to Be Rare?" I didn't realize that exactly until I looked it up today. Sometimes I do this presentation under different names. So, to be rare is to be precious, with or without the question mark. I don't know. There's a lot of question marks, so I'm looking forward to exploring that. But really, the topic broadly is the science and philosophy of rarity. Specifically with plants. These are all plants that are considered rare in Michigan. I'm not going to spend the time to go through them, but they're beautiful. That's all we need to know. And that's one reason to care about them, because we like looking at them. We like looking at the pictures of them. That brings me enough joy some days. But I like to do good things for them as well, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. So what I'm talking about today is basically what MNFI, Michigan Natural Features Inventory, does. And so I'll lead off by describing what we do. And essentially, by going through my talk, I'm going to be kind of pulling back the curtain. How does the sausage get made? However you want to put it. Like, people look at rare species and they think, oh, rare. Rare is exciting. Rare is good. And I do not disagree, but what do we really, really mean when we say a thing is rare? And we mean a whole bunch of different things, and it depends on the species. But that is our mission. We are the science wing of the rarity cabal, basically. And we are connected to a network that is global through NatureServe, which is the data wing of what we do. We're a natural heritage program, and so all the blue places support natural heritage programs. Each state, each Canadian province, each territory has a natural heritage program, which is what we are. But we're connected to rare species data globally. And you zoom in on Michigan, and this is our fiefdom, right? And so this is the rare species database for Michigan. Each point is a rare thing, either a plant, vertebrate or invertebrate animal, or a natural community, a high-quality natural community. So when you zoom out, that's what it looks like. All those points represent a record, historical to contemporary, of a rare thing or an important thing on the landscape. There are, as you can see, lots of dots. You saw that with your eyes. Here it is in numbers, over 25,000 records. A lot of those things are no longer there, but they're at least a documentation of a thing that at least used to occur, and that's kind of the breakdown. Currently, we're tracking 451 plant species in this database, 344 animals, 80 natural community types. You can see the number of individual records, and that's current as of today. I checked it It keeps it going up, basically, is the point. So, let's see. Okay, so these are the three different things I'm going to be addressing in turn today. First of all, at the big picture, what is rarity? Why are we talking about rarity from different perspectives? And, you know, should we care? How do we care? I don't know. It's up to you to decide if you actually care. I guess probably most of you do, or all. And then how do we classify that rarity in practice? And then I'm going to go through looking at the rare plant species in Michigan, the things we considered rare when we first started tracking these things till now, and sort of describe how we deal with that data and how we make those decisions about that's rare and oh, no, it isn't anymore, that wasn't rare, that is rare now, that kind of stuff. So, okay. First of all, big picture, we hear a lot about biodiversity hotspots, and there they all are. There's a relatively new one there, as you can see on the Atlantic coastal plain in southeastern U.S. That's the newest one. Places where there are just a bunch, like a concentration of biodiversity. So as a result, there's a lot of rare stuff there. Those places get a lot of attention, as they should, because they support a lot of species. And that's where conservation can really make a difference. But really, rare species are everywhere, in every little nook and cranny. And however you circumscribe the geography, there's rare species. And one of the ways most of us get introduced to the concept of rarity is through the Endangered Species Act. Most people are familiar with that. And that has a lot to do with the bald eagle. We think the bald eagle as one of the first rare species, the species that got that attention, but hopefully you've all noticed that there's also a bunch of little species too. It's not just the big banner species like the bald eagle, it's also like the pow-sheep skipperling, which is, there's a meeting out in Minnesota this week where people are trying to figure out how to keep that thing from going extinct. Best of luck to them, because that's a tough hill to climb. So there's, let's see, I don't know if there's a current number, but it's close enough. 1,669 species protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act. Believe it or not, 56% or 938 of those are plants. Also, believe it or not, those 56% of those species that are plants get about 4% of the funding. So I'm here to focus on the plants because the funding and a lot of the other attention, ways to give attention to things doesn't often get focused on plants because they're not charismatic. I don't know. They're important. We're all here because we think they're important, obviously. Yeah, so the Federal Endangered Species Act is one thing that focuses on and protects rare species. Michigan has its own Endangered Species Act that protects species that are rare within the boundaries of the state of Michigan. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service, federal agency, their fiefdom, whatever, is the Federal Endangered Species Act. They enforce that. The Michigan DNR has been empowered to enforce the Michigan Endangered Species Act. MNFI and a bunch of others, that's not what we do. We're not enforcing rare species laws. If you tell me something is being threatened, that's not my job to do something about that. It's my job to tell somebody else to do something about that. My job is to support the science and the understanding and the data that helps the regulators enforce those laws. So that's just that's the context within which I'm working. I think not everybody understands that context, so I'd like to let you all know. Okay, why are species rare? I could stop here. Does it look like the Millennium Falcon? I think so. I love it. That's the landing pad for the Millennium Falcon. I think it's Atlanta. I can't remember. It's something from a plane, obviously. So, yeah, obviously, that's the main reason species are rare, because a lot of the landscape looks like that, and it doesn't look like that. So this is a nice drone shot that my friend and coworker and freshly minted second-time father, Jesse Lincoln, took from a drone. So this shows a landscape in Hartwick Pines where there's an aquatic environment scaling into a wetland environment, scaling into an upland environment. So the landscape used to be connected, and now it's fragmented by the Millennium Falcon. So yeah, just generally like places that used to look like this, that you can actually go to see this place, now look like this. Places that used to look like this, now look like this. That's sort of like, I'm kind of drilling down now. Like I'm starting to get slightly more specific. Folks may be familiar with these circa 1800 vegetation maps. Michigan's got a good one, other states have them. Basically a snapshot of what the landscape looked like prior to widespread European, call it what you will, settlement, colonization, etc., transformation of the landscape. So the landscape used to look like this, and it used to have people in it that are no longer in it, taking the actions that they took that resulted in that landscape. So those two things are different. The landscape has changed, and the people that are in it are behaving differently, basically. And those are two of the major reasons why things are rare in Michigan and elsewhere. And all the other stuff, like we hear about, like all the other reasons, like don't need to belabor that. But let's belabor the deer just a little bit. Okay, good. Glad we did that. So I like to say that extinction is forever if I'm pressed for time and somebody asks me why it matters, because extinction is forever. Even at a, can also be at a more local scale, even if not a global scale. So, and when things start dropping off the map, species start disappearing from places at an increasing rate, that's a sign. That's a sign that something's breaking down in the environment. It's not always obvious, but once species start missing out, dropping from the landscape, it's a cue to us to just start doing something about it. And it is my assertion that species have intrinsic value to live in the places where they are and where they evolved. They often have specific utility for humans too. I'd like to sort of say that's a bonus. That's great that we get to reap value from things, but I think focusing on the value can skew our viewpoint on the world. And you can think of ecosystems as like a sweater, and they're pretty ragged generally. So as you're losing those species, you're tugging, and eventually your sweater's going to fall apart, and you're going to be naked. And so nobody wants to just be standing there naked in front of everybody. So maybe some of you do, but if you follow the analogy, you probably don't. Okay, cool. So that's some big picture ideas that I like to talk about in terms of rarity. So what do we as scientists and citizens, what do we do about that? How do we decide if something's rare, and kind of what kind of things can we do about it? I will introduce the mascot for the talk. This is the wizard who is smoking 2 different pipes for some reason I found on the internet. And so I think that the point here is that certainly before I got involved in the rare species science, really didn't understand. Like, maybe there was just a wizard who was making these decisions, like sitting on high and somewhere in outer space somehow, like divining rarity, and that's where the Michigan Threatened and Endangered Species list comes from. I refer to it as the list. Is it on the list? Is that species on the list or is it not? But what is the list? So start with animals because they count too. So these are the species that breakdown of some of the species, categories of species that we track in our database. Yeah, go ahead and. Oh yeah, I will. I shall now repeat the question. She asked, can I define extirpated? And I said, I sure will. So these are the categories in terms of legal status that we apply to species. So first of all, we have federally listed, we talked about that. There's 21 federally listed animal species in Michigan. And then we move into the state list, we have special concern species, which are not legally protected. they are, you could think of it as a watch list. They're kind of rare. They're not rare enough to be protected. But if we don't keep an eye on them, if we don't take actions to support them, they might cross that thinner line there and enter into the protected species category, which is once you pass in there, first you get to threatened. As you get more rare, endangered, like really like it's about to happen, and then extirpated, which is like a local extinction. So species that are considered extirpated from Michigan are probably not extinct, which is the global word. They're not gone from the planet. We just haven't seen them in Michigan in long enough, and their habitat is degraded enough that we think there's a good chance they're not here anymore. And then here's the breakdown, the similar breakdown for the plants, right? So the numbers are somewhat different, but the proportions are similar. There's a lot more, there's more plants that we track on the list just because there's a bunch more animals that could go on this list, but they haven't been assessed. Spiders, for starters. Like, it requires enormous amounts of expertise. So it doesn't mean that there aren't rare spiders. They just haven't been assessed for Michigan. And rare a bunch of other things. It just, we can't put it on the list if we haven't assessed them as a group. Bees are a recent addition because one of MNFI's recent hires, Logan Rowe, was really good with the bees. And nobody had done it before, and he did it. And so he did the work, got the money to do the work, is also important. So 451 is the number of plant species in Michigan that we track, which means we consider them rare and we track them in our database. Turns out that's about a quarter of the native species in Michigan. Take a drink of water and think about that. Turns out it's a lot, that's what I decided. Okay. This is our website. This is where you can find information about all those things. And you just Google MNFI, you'll find it. Plants and animals, you click on the plants part. You'll see a list like this. You can click on each one of those things and learn most of them. We're still adding. There's some new species on our list that don't have information yet, but we're still adding. And you'll notice that there's 4 columns. 2 of them are the legal status. That's what I've been talking about so far: the threatened, endangered, special concern, extirpated, federal, state. Then there's these other columns that are concern the global and state level conservation status. So that has nothing to do with legal protection. That's a scientific assessment of concern for these species. So the legal status I've talked about a bunch. That's the ones those legal statuses are enshrined in law, except for special concern, which is just a decision that we make to say, hey, keep an eye out on these. But this conservation status is the scientific assessment of the rarity of things, basically. And so we assign these G ranks and these S ranks. NatureServe being the sort of the big picture. They assess the global ranks, they assign those, and then at the state level, we assess the S ranks. It stands for subnational, but you can sub in state there. And that's just based on data on population threats and trends for these species. And so when you look at all the 441 species I've been referring to, they are at best vulnerable, S3. So it ranges from S1 to S5. A big chunk of them are S3, some are S2, some are S1. And so, did I get those backwards? I think those are backwards. So do what you need to do in your mind to switch those around. And so there's also these other categories. We've talked about extirpated. There's also an intermediate category called historical, which means we don't think it necessarily is extirpated. We just don't have recent data on these species. We think it's probably still around. We just haven't had the time or the effort or whatever. There's a lot to take care of. And then there's a bunch that we haven't gotten around to ranking yet because we keep adding new things. So, and it costs money and time. So we've got other things to do with our time. So this is the corresponding global status of the species we track. And I think this is an important thing to understand, that this one I got right in the graph. So most of the species that we're tracking, that we're saying in rare in Michigan, they're just rare in Michigan. If they disappear from Michigan, that's not good. We're losing important populations often on the edge of the range, important genetic diversity, those kinds of things. But they're not disappearing from the planet. Doesn't mean we shouldn't care about them and take actions to preserve them in the habitats where they occur in Michigan. But most of them are globally secure species. And then as you kind of move towards that G1 critically imperiled level, the numbers get smaller. Here's the species along the bottom there that are the rarest of the rare in Michigan. The first two I'm going to, one of the first two I'm going to talk about later. But these are ones that are mostly or entirely endemic to Michigan. So the one in the middle is known from that Packera species. That is known from a single occurrence on Isle Royale. There's only in the world. So it was also just a recently, it took a taxonomist, the people that decide what the difference between species, looked at it eventually at some point, was like, oh, that is a different species. And so it's a recently invented species, as I like to say. Okay, let's revisit the wizard. And pull back the curtain. So digging deeper on what do we mean when we say rare? This is one of my favorite pictures. I have dozens of these pictures. These are botanists. Nobody's paying attention to whatever's spoken. There's a few off in the corner listening to the person talking, but everybody's like checking something out, which I think is great. That's my people. Okay, so I'm going to characterize it in 4 different ways of why things are rare, why we think they're rare in Michigan. There are reasons that they're rare. A huge chunk of things in Michigan are just range limited. So here's one example, Trillium recurvatum, which barely peaks up into southwestern Michigan. I think it's only in Berrien County at this point, but it is in Berrien County. It's hard to miss once you get to Berrien County. Something about these maps, I'm going to show you a lot of these maps, so I want to give you a chance to understand them. So this is the Biota of North America program. I like the maps because they give a nice level of resolution of information about species distributions. So if a state is green, the species in question occurs there. There's documentation of it. If the counties in that state are green, that species is considered common enough there. But if the counties where it's shown in each state are yellow, that's a state where it's considered rare or at threat or something like that. So, and you can see that this species, it is range limited on all edges of its range. So in each of those states where you see a yellow county, same story. We're just on one corner of the species range. So in Texas, they consider it rare for the same reason we consider it rare in Michigan. It's just on the other end of the range. And that's a lot of species. Species have ranges, and at some point kind of drops off because the climate, the soils, whatever, just stops being suitable for them. And therefore, it just snuck into the state, so to speak, and we keep tabs on it because it's rare in Michigan. Yeah?
Just so I'm clear, the dark green means that it shows up somewhere in that state.
Yep.
The lighter green is the county that it's in,
Mm-hmm.
and the yellow is then when it's rare to extinct in that county.
Yep, exactly. Yep. So she was just confirming green, the dark green represents a state where the species exists. The rest of the information is county level data within those states. If it's the lighter green, those are counties within a state where the species is considered secure or not rare. And if it's yellow, those are counties where a species has been documented within a state that considers it rare or at threat. see a lot of these maps. So thank you for clarifying, because otherwise you're going to be staring cross-eyed after a while.
So it's not possible to have both a yellow and a light green county in one state?
So it's not possible to have a yellow and a light green county in one state. I'm going to say that's probably true. That would be weird. I wouldn't know how to interpret that. Yep. Yeah, because he's saying Prairie Trim is very common in Berrien County, but it's representing the state level status of it, not the county level status. So it's county level distribution maps with some more information about state status, basically. So that I could spend the whole evening talking about range limited species, but you get the idea probably. They just made it here. They come from every direction too. That was just one direction I chose. We also have a bunch of disjunct populations, so that's where the core of the range of the species is somewhere else, and then there's a break, and then they show up here. So the best disjunct populations are the coastal plain disjuncts. I am an objective scientist. These are the best ones. As you can see, there's a ton of species that have this distribution that show up in Michigan. They're really cool, and they occur in cool habitats, and they're all little teeny tiny sedges, so you love them. So you can see, you can follow the coastal plain, and that's where the most of this species is, as these coastal plain disjuncts are. And then there's a break, and then they show up in the southern Lake Michigan area. And this distribution could be shown for a few dozen species. I don't know, 30 to 50, something like that. And most of them are little teeny tiny sedges, which is really fun. So, back to the mic. The could be birds, but the most logical explanation is I just pointed to the Mississippi drainage. When the oceans were higher, the ocean filled up into the Mississippi drainage, and so that Atlantic coastal distribution was slightly more continuous with Lake Michigan. It was closer. It brought them closer up, so there wasn't that big gap, and so they were able to jump back. And then as as things receded, the ocean ended up where it is there. It's just further away. That makes the most sense, but I don't really know. I don't think anybody knows for sure. But that's how hypotheses work. Another common disjunction is western species that probably, I know you're going to ask, so probably, why? As the glaciers receded, a lot of things followed the glaciers, and then as things warmed up, the habitat became not suitable for them, and there's just some places where species just kind of, as I say, dropped out. They stayed there because the conditions were good enough for them. And this is an example of one, Palagoceros, that occurs in the high plains. There's a few species that have this distribution, the high plains. That is where those 4 counties where it's restricted to is the highest elevation in the lower peninsula. And so it has some pretty extreme winters as a result. This species probably thinks, yeah, this is close enough. I can deal with that. Another common disjunction is actually the Pacific Northwest specifically, and I think of it as like a upside down U. And it's probably also the glaciers too, as the glaciers receded, but the distribution of these species is up into Canada and back around down through Canada to often, many of them are just restricted to the Keweenaw Peninsula. This one's a little more widespread in the UP, but I could talk about those all day, but I'm not. Trying to not talk about one thing all day. Some species are just intrinsically rare. So here's Hill's thistle. It's got not as wide of a distribution as the other maps you've seen, and you can notice one. What is the one thing you notice about the map from what I've told you about these maps? That's right. It's not common anywhere. All the counties are yellow because everywhere it occurs, it's considered vulnerable to imperiled, and so that's what the NatureServe map up there is another way of looking at species status and conservation status. That gives you the conservation status for each state or province where a thing occurs, and those are all either, Yeah, those are either S3 to S1, so vulnerable to critically imperiled in the states where it occurs. And I've circled the northern lower peninsula, that same high plains region from Agassiz. It's a stronghold. That's where a lot of hill thistle in the world lives, and managers who work there are frustrated with it because it's so common, and because it's a rare species, managers have to, like the DNR and the Forest Service, they have to take special dispensation for it because it's a rare species, but it's kind of everywhere. So it's a bit of an interesting challenge. And the reason why the species is so common in that area is because we can't grow crops there. You can't grow corn there, at least. It's mostly public land. So all those colored squares and stuff are different public land holdings. So yellow's DNR, the blue is Forest Service, the purple is Fish and Wildlife Service. So that landscape is full of public land that's being managed for various uses, including biodiversity. It also looks like this, which is exactly what the species wants. The entire landscape. So it's a happy hill thistle if you haven't caught. So it's a landscape that can support this species, which it's rare to find a landscape in, especially in Michigan, that can support something. Everything's so fragmented. We're used to that down here. Another intrinsically rare species is nearly endemic to Michigan, called Houghton's goldenrod. And you can see there's a funny little arching thing there I put on the map with my PowerPoint skills. It actually turned out great. That is pretty accurately the Niagara escarpment, which is a chunk of dolomitic limestone, like harder limestone, that has persisted as the softer limestone has been worn away, weathered away, and lots of cliffs and cool stuff. But also just a highly, because it's limestone, alkaline substrate, and just for whatever reasons, there's some endemism there. So there's a few other species that are known only in the world from this Niagara escarpment. Dwarf lake iris, our state wildflower, for example, is another one of those things. So this is this is the only place in the world where you can find this Houghton's goldenrod. And so it is much rarer than it's the rarest thing I've talked about so far, I think. So other than the one that's only on Isle Royal. Cool. And the fourth reason I refer to as taxonomic upheaval, that might be a little dramatic, but it is, it confuses people when you change the names of things and you decide a thing's a species and not a species. So yeah, maybe it's accurate. So that's Douglas Houghton of Houghton's goldenrod fame and lots of other fame. He was the state geologist when we were first becoming a state. And he was also a botanist. So he brought Houghton's goldenrod to whomever, Linnaeus or something, and said, named the species after him. So you'll notice on the BONAP map from 2014, it has Houghton's goldenrod in a part of the state, whereas you look in the MNFI database, where the red circle thing is, ellipse, it isn't there. So these are both maps of Houghton's goldenrod, and that's Houghton looking down saying, where's my northern lower Michigan representation? And because he kind of looks pissed in that picture. I really love it. Yeah, question? Oh, probably, yeah. Probably anything Houghton is probably named after that guy, yeah. He was he a governor? He may have been a governor too or something. He was definitely a politician in early Michigan. So, what happened to Houghton's goldenrod there? Taxonomy happened. And we got a new species in about 2010, care of Pam Loretto, who was in Todd Barkman's lab right here at Western. And she helped describe this new species, Voss's goldenrod, named after the Mr. Michigan Botany at Voss, right here. It was pictured here. It was, he's no longer with us as of somewhat, past 10 years or so. But yeah, he made the biggest impact on Michigan botany of anybody. So here's, see on the right that Houghton's goldenrod. Here's Voss's goldenrod. They look pretty similar. The parts are a little bit bigger. There's but based upon the laws of deciding what is the lines between species, it is considered a different species. So we got an endemic species overnight. And it is restricted to that area. It's restricted to about a 5 square mile area in northern Michigan. So it's real recent. It has not been a species for very long. Okay, so there might be other ways to characterize it. This is the way I describe, the reasons why things are rare. Range limited, disjuncts, some are intrinsically rare, and some became rare once a scientist decided it was a different species. So are they truly rare, or are they just data limited, right? So I've talked a lot about, looking at what we do. We have this list of rare species, and it makes us excited about the species that are on the list, and we want to go find them. We want to document them. It feels good. It's exciting. There's a little bit of glory every once in a while, more these days because of social media, a little bit more glory. So obviously it's kind of a is it a hypothetical question? I don't know. So those are dots of rare plant species in Michigan from the Michigan Natural Heritage Database that I co-manage. And you'll see there's some patterning to it, right? So there's some clusters around Ann Arbor, there's some clusters around Kalamazoo, there's some clusters around Grand Rapids, places where people live and botanize. That's one of the patterns. There's this cluster over here, which is the Allegan State Game Area. That's a little bit of both. There's a bunch of rare stuff there. So that's partly real. Can't see it great here necessarily. The implication here, though, is when you look at the aerial imagery, if you're used to looking at aerial imagery, you'll see some patterning there where there are no dots because there's just farms there. So there's some of this is truly rare because there's no habitat in some places. There are definitely some large chunks of the landscape that these species just are never going to occur. So it's a little bit of bias. It's a little bit of reality. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time taking you through what I call the changing face of rarity. We have to consult the wizard, as always. And these are the original wizards. So this is not the first list of rare species for Michigan, but this is the first fleshed out list. So this is the first legit, spent some time with it, really analyzed it. And this is published in Michigan Botanist, which is now the Great Lakes Botanist. It's a great journal for regional botany. And so here's the breakdown from that, what I'm calling the initial status in 1977. A lot of threatened, some special concern, few endangered, a few probably extinct or extirpated. And there was 326 species on that list. And so every once in a while, that list gets evaluated for all tech, not just for plants, for all animal groups too. By law, it's supposed to happen every 5 years. Doesn't always happen that way. A technical committee looks at it, decides which species get moved around on the list, which go off it, which go on it. They hand it to the DNR. The DNR does a thing, goes to the legislature. It's a lot of steps. If it breaks down at any one point in those times, it just doesn't happen. It doesn't become official. The plants are still as rare as they are, though. So these are all the years it happened. It has happened since 1977, and now here's the current distribution. As I've been saying, we got 451 species on the list now. Some shifting around, basically more that we, proportionally, more that we think are extinct, more that we think are endangered, which is just kind of the sign of the times. That's how it goes. Some of it is data based. Some of it is really things are rarer than they were. But we're going to dig into that. So if we look at that original list and break it down by where we are now, about 3/4 of them are still on the list. Okay, so 76%. They may have moved around, but they're on the list. There's 79 that have been removed, and we've added 200 plus more. And so I'm going to break down each one of these categories starting with the ones that have been removed from the list. So I assigned a reason to why I thought it looked like they were removed from that list. Delisted is basically like it's thought to be less rare, more common. Some, it was decided they're not even native in Michigan. That happens. Some of that taxonomy stuff happened. And there's, I think, 9 that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Those might probably are taxonomic, but I couldn't quite decide what to call them. So let's look at the ones that we think are they're just in better shape than we thought they were at the time. This is one of my favorites. Spring avens, I think, is what that would be. Yeah, there it is, written right up there. I look at the Latin name. I'm like, what's the common name? Oh yeah, it's right there. I put it on there on purpose. So that was a special concern species for about 10 years. And then it just started spreading throughout the state for whatever reason. Climate change, let's just say it was climate change. It's a southern species in distribution. It's a little bit weedy. It's got those, it sticks to your socks. So yeah, this is definitely something that has mostly recent observations of. It's probably spreading around. That's pretty uncommon for things that were on the rare species list. Then there's other stuff like this, photo by Mike Weiss. American Columbo, still awesome, still pretty uncommon, but folks went out, documented more of it. Like, okay, it's uncommon, but it's not rare. We don't need to track it like it's a rare species. We'd have too much documentation. Once again, still awesome. Look at the flowers. Go see it whenever you have a chance. Okay. Here's some other examples. My favorite is spotted wintergreen, because when I saw that was on the original list, I thought, really? Seriously? maybe that one has expanded its range between 1977 and about 2000 when I started paying attention. But yeah, and in what's that? Oh, sorry. The one on the bottom, she asked which is spotted wintergreen. The one in the bottom center, Camophila maculata. Sandy places. It's restricted to West Michigan more or less, but anyway, here's some examples of things that used to be rare and are now semi-common or like kind of uncommon. But yeah, most of these you don't see every day for sure, but they're not rare enough to be considered rare. Yeah. That's a good. I do not know. That's a good question. I'm sure there was. I think my guess is most of them were special concern, but there were probably others that were first listed as threatened. But I'd have to. It's a big spreadsheet. I haven't quite memorized it yet. Working on it. Some quick, just to give you an idea what I mean by taxonomic changes. So here's a species that was thought to be only known from Belle Isle for a long time, up until this most recent revision in 2023. And then eventually, whoever's the blue-eyed grass expert said, hey, you know what? That really isn't its own species. The thing we were calling Cicerynchium hestile, that is just Cicerynchium albidum. That's just one of the common things in southern Michigan. So that albidum is common, yep. And so therefore that thing, which hasn't been seen from Belle Isle in a long time, so it would have been extirpated from the state, but he did, yeah. I don't know where he took. Yes, Robert Smith from the Cure took that photo. Thank you. And then there's other stuff that, for example, this Abbey's Woodsia taxonomist looked at it and they said, that's not really a species, that's a sterile hybrid. So that's a thing that arrives from hybridization from 2 other ferns and can't produce its own offspring. So that breaks the rule of species. You can't be considered a species if you can't produce your own offspring. So just a couple examples. So moving on from that, let's look at some of these things that are still on the list and see how they've moved around. So most of them haven't changed. They still have the same exact status, threatened, endangered, special concern, as they were in 77, which I found really interesting. Some have been uplisted, more rare. Some have been downlisted, considered less rare. So let's look at those first. Here's dwarf bulrush, one of these. It's associated with a lot of those coastal plain disjuncts, but as you can see, it has a very different distribution. But it's found in the same habitats. It's considered threatened. People kept looking for it, found more, special concern, and so it sits at special concern now. So that one has been sort of put in a different category. Hey, it was just data limited. We just hadn't found enough of it. It's teeny tiny, as you can see by the size of the pencil. Got to crawl around on your hands and knees sometimes to find these things. Here's some other examples of those things that were once considered more rare than they are now. The ones on the left were thought extirpated from the state. So snow trillium and Plantago cordata, this native plantain species. Those were thought extirpated from the state, but they're not. We know of several locations where those things occur. And the ones on the right were threatened or endangered and are now special concern species. And that is the power of data. That is the power. That is the reason we put things on the list. One of them. The other reason is to protect them from being, destroyed in the places where they occur. But a big reason is so that people will pay attention and say, "Oh no, I've seen that." Which sometimes the answer is no, actually you didn't. You saw another species. But oftentimes it's, "Hey, you did see that thing. Thank you." And we put the data in the database. It grows, it grows. At some point we assess it and say, hey, that species is not as rare as we thought. Another example of a downlisting, my second and only other, is this funky one right here, where these dodders, I don't know if you've ever seen these orange twining things, these parasitic plants, no chlorophyll, like barely any roots. I don't know if they have roots. They just attach themselves to other plants. And 5 of the 9 Cuscuta species, the dodders in Michigan, are considered rare, some of which haven't been seen in a long time, but they can't be protected because they're on the noxious weed list. So because of one law about noxious weeds in agriculture, which broadly classifies anything in that genus as a noxious weed, it supersedes this other law that says these things are actually really rare and worth protecting. This field right here with Cuscuta pentagona, we figured they're really hard to identify too. This one, Todd Barkman sent to a friend who grew it up on agar and is one of the worldwide experts, and he grew it up in the lab to identify it. And this is probably the only place it probably occurs in Michigan. And yep, it can't be protected legally. Yeah. How do they reproduce? They flower. They flower and make seeds. Yep. They've got little teeny tiny white flowers, but yep. And hopefully they land close to the host. And some of them are very specific. Some are more, more particular about what their host should be. Yep. Cool. Now for the fun part, the things that are more rare. The doom. I'm kind of sliding into doom and gloom all of a sudden. Sorry, I should have done this in the opposite direction, but this is not my want. So I'm going to tell a few stories, and I start sort of been sprinkling in some anecdotes. Now I'm going into full-blown vignette story. So it's an interesting one. So world begonia, it's an orchid. Orchids are just, you gotta love them. You can't not love them, especially if you're a botanist. So this is one that was special concern, is now threatened, and did some surveys for this a few years back. So at the time in 2019, there was 18 known occurrences, and 7 of them had recent data. So what you see on the bottom of this graph is, so I've talked about the G rank, global, and the S rank, state. Once you get down to the population, you also have to assess the status of that population in order to understand how that species is doing. And so A is good, and D is bad. And so if that species has a bunch of A-ranked populations in the state, it's doing better. And if it has a bunch of D-ranked populations in the state, it's doing worse. You might consider moving it from threatened to an endangered, that kind of thing. There's all these other terms we use. E just means we saw it, we didn't assess its rank. F means we looked for it a few times and we couldn't find it. failed to find. H means we just don't have any recent data. Nobody's looked in a long time. And X means Walmart. So that's, I just described that. But there it is pictorially for you. And here's the terms we use to describe those, what we call EO ranks, element occurrence ranks. Excellent, good, fair, poor. They're just the standard terms we use. And people use all across the Natural Heritage Network. Yes?
So, does this indicate the genetic diversity of these small populations? Because I'm thinking if they make a decent number of seeds, is there enough diversity within the seeds of the small population to grow up
Mhm.
a healthier population?
Yeah, does it represent genetic diversity? Generally not, because we generally don't have that data. It's mostly just it's what we are observing. How big is the population? Is it reproducing? You know, because a lot of things just there's no youngsters around. That's a bad sign. Are there real threats? Are there like surrounded by invasive species? Are deer just browsing it? Are there potential threats? You know, so it's generally that kind of thing. We generally don't have data on genetic diversity for any of these situations.
Also, is there any commonality between the pollinators for these various kinds of?
Yeah, are there pollinators in common between rare species? Great question. Myself and Logan Rowe, who I mentioned earlier, one of our entomologists, we're real excited about maybe exploring that at some point, like figuring out are rare insects pollinating rare plants. So one of the many potential projects we have in our backs of our brains, but hard telling because we don't know. Okay, so this species was subjected to what I call an unfortunate incident. So at any rate, that red circle shows an occurrence of that species on DNR land. Oh, I said it. So there was some oak mortality. Maybe it was oak wilt. I can't remember what it was. And then, so they're like, oh, we got to do a salvage cut. That's what foresters do. And then just kind of looked the other way with the environmental review. Knew it was there. Something happened. I don't know exactly what happened, but somebody made the wrong decision or a naive decision, and they clear cut the stand. That's not good for this species. So as a result, sort of as a, hey, we made a mistake, we'd like to do something to address the situation, and because some people made loud noises about it, Michigan Botanical Society was among them, thank you. We did this, DNR paid for a status survey of a state listed species, which is pretty uncommon. We just don't, state listed rare plants just don't get the attention that like animals get. There just isn't funding sources for it. It's just the nature of the world at this point in time. So we went around to all these places, we assessed it, we crawled around through the habitat, which it kind of looks, a lot of it looks like this. So like that upper left, that was my hair all wound up in sticks after crawling through high bush blueberry for an entire day. So it's fun. Trust me, it's fun. It's a good time, but man, there's a cost to pay. So again, this was the distribution of ranks. You see, there's the biggest category is H. Like there's just no recent data prior to us doing this survey. We got that number way down, and so the orange is the new distribution of ranks. A bunch of them we just couldn't find. We looked for them real hard and we couldn't find. There was one we said is an X, definitely not there anymore. But yeah, of the 18 occurrences that we knew about, we confirmed 6 of them, and we actually added one more. So kind of ended up in a similar spot, but with way better data. So that's kind of how we move through the process of deciding how rare a thing is. Sometimes we get this kind of data, and this is how the process works. I'm going to tell one more story about how we do that by looking at prairie species. So a lot of prairie species are in a pretty bad shape in their natural environments. Here's an example of purple prairie clover. It persisted for a while up until the early 90s, and it is now since then has been considered officially extirpated from the state. You can grow from seed till you're blue in the face, but the habitats, natural habitats that used to support it, don't exist anymore. They're gone, and so that species is gone. That picture was taken in Iosco County, I think, where it was planted in a prairie planting, like way up here. Its native range is way down here. So you can plant it lots of places, but that's you're not recreating the habitat for it, because that's unfortunately is gone. And that's true of grassland habitats globally. So we're not unique in that. This is a map showing, where are the critically endangered places in the globe, and many of those are grasslands, including the North American tallgrass prairie there. This is sort of a unbiased, there aren't people that do what I do that are focused on my corner of the world. They're looking at the globe. So, and the same thing is happening here, blah, 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 blah. Things are dying. So here we have grassland habitats in Michigan on the left, all those green spots, and then trust me, there are green spots on the map on the right. Those are the contemporary grasslands, including barrens, prairies, and savannas. A couple examples of the species, because pretty things make medicine go down better. And I'm trying to figure out how to estimate this right. So anywhere between 12 and 28%, depending on how you look at it, of the species we track are restricted to these upland prairie habitats. Many of those, or a handful of those, were observed once in the state. So I talked about Douglas Houghton. He led a geological survey of the state in the 1800s, looking for, stuff to mine. And he found it. He did find some stuff to mine, that's for sure. But they also collected a lot of plants, and including some of these things right here, which have not been seen since. So these are just some examples of plant species. And I put the G rank just to give you a sense of, again, that's how secure it is on the globe. These are things that are generally on the edge of the range in Michigan. They're secure elsewhere. There's a few, like the one on top, that ear-leaved foxglove, Agellanus auriculata. That is a legit rare species. As you can see from the map on the upper right, it's either imperiled, critically imperiled, or vulnerable in most of the states where it occurs. But the vast majority of these, they're just on the edge of the range in Michigan. We didn't have much prairie habitat to begin with, but it's neat that there's a bunch of species there's one specimen of it from the state, from like that one first go through. Yeah, it just speaks to how little of the habitat we have left. And so these cool dudes went to assess the situation of prairie habitats in Southwest Michigan from a rare plant perspective. Again, I describe them as canaries in the coal mine. So the status of species that are dependent on these habitats is the story of those habitats. And so we picked these species as indicative of upland prairie habitats in Southwest Michigan. These are things that are purely restricted to upland prairies. So a lot of prairie species also grow in wetlands called prairie fens, which we have more of those. We have those, and so it's a refuge for a lot of these things. These things don't. These are purely restricted to upland prairie habitats. And we looked at it and we said, yeah, it looks like we have X number. We believe it's a number far less than X. So let's go check it out. So we went around. We spent as much time as we could looking at occurrences of these species, and so this was the last, prior to the 2023 reassessment of the list. 2009 was the previous one, so that's why I say circa 2009. And that was the status of those species: special concern, threatened, right? And so after our surveys, of course, it's worse. Things are dying, sorry. So yeah, white false indigo got shifted from special concern to threatened, prairie coreopsis threatened to endangered, prairie bird's foot violet threatened to endangered. So again, the point is, this isn't to make you sad, although we can talk about it if it did, but the point is to show that this is how the process works. You do the status assessment. You really truly try to understand the status of these species, and these are just some examples of how the sausage gets made. So here it is pictorially. 66% of the lead plant on the left, amorpha populations were there. 43% of the white wild indigo were there. 63% of the coreopsis were there. About half, or exactly half, of the petunias were there, and only one of the prairie bird foot violet. That one's pretty much gonzo, except for, there's one occurrence left in the state. So, and that's, again, this is a tall grass prairie in, outside of Dallas, basically. It's like 1,000+ acres of virgin prairie habitat. We just don't have that. We never had that. The biggest thing we have is about 2 acres over by Sturgis here. And that's the tippity top of what we got. Everything else is, to use this picture that Richard Brewer took in Harrison Cemetery back when they didn't mow it, this prairie cemetery near Schoolcraft, and also indicative of the cemetery being where the prairies exist now. So this is basically what the things that we call prairie in Michigan, this is what they look like. They're either plowed under or on some sort of a bulldozed edge of a railroad, or they're constantly being closed in within a railroad right away. So that's just the status of it. Tons of, there's still, some of these rare species are still hanging on, but I'm hard pressed to call them prairie habitats anymore. It's just there's not enough of the linkages. The sweater is bare basically, and there's just a few things hanging on for now. That's just where we're at with these habitats. So let's talk about some things that haven't changed. I guess that's one thing that hasn't changed, but just a sampling of the species that are still the same status that now as they were in 1977. Okay, so I talked about Douglas hawthorn in the UP, Laurentine fragile ferns, a species of the Niagara escarpment. Meadow beauty is one you can find out in Allegan. It's kind of plentiful in some spots there. So these have been on the watch list for, nearly 50 years, and they're still on. We're still like, we'll just keep an eye on these guys. They're still kind of rare. We're probably, we may not find enough of them to kick them off the list, but we're still keeping an eye on them. Maybe just because we like to look at them. I don't know. A bunch of species have been threatened the whole time. Some of these we might be able to find more and bump them off the list. I think Virginia snakeroot has a chance. That seems to be showing up some places. And that's just people, people look for it. People look for things. I think the age of, I'm kind of grumpy about iNaturalists sometimes, but it really motivates people to get out and look at things. And I've definitely, some of these species have been showing up on iNaturalist, and it's like, hey, people are actually taking an interest in, young people, you might say, are taking an interest in finding many of these things. And then some things like heart-leaved arnica in the UP and cream wild indigo down here have been considered endangered the whole time. So we just haven't found any more of it, and may not. And then there's a bunch that we thought were extirpated in 1977, and we were probably right, because we're not finding any more of those things. Cool. And then, just real quick, I see time is marching on, so real quick, just describe a few things that were just on, they've added to the list that weren't on the list up until very recently. Which I feel is like, okay, I think I'm landing on a positive tone here. So these are species that, there's some species that were special concern that are now threatened and endangered, but I skipped over those in the interest of time, and because there's probably enough depressing stuff. These are these are some examples of new species to Michigan. So these had not been documented in Michigan until the past 10, 15 years. So they're rare because they're, we just realized they occurred here, so they're rare, but they're species that we didn't know existed, and that's pretty awesome. So they're just kind of, most of these are in the UP, not surprising because there's a lot of wilderness there. There's just so much land to cover, and you get out there and you find the right thing if you're looking for it, and a lot of that has happened recently. So, and they're only in 1 or 2 spots, but the folks who found these are keep looking for them and do continue to find new populations of some of these things. There's another brand new species that was just invented that is pretty rare in the world, as you can see by the map in the upper right. So Carex viridis stellata, green star sedge. It's one that grows in fens. So everything that we call green star sedge now, we would have called this Carex cryptolepis before. We would have looked at it and said, no, it's that thing. And then some taxonomist was like, no, actually, those beaks are a lot longer, and it's a new species. So that's cool. That's exciting to have new species to play around with. Tony Resnicek, if you don't know, is the sedge guy. He's one of the global sedge guys. And he sent me an email a year or so ago and said, "Oh, I found this Carex shortiana. I've been looking at it. It's in Indiana and Ohio. I've been looking for it in southern Michigan, and he finally found it." So like, if you look for these things, they're out there sometimes. You just have to know what to look for sometimes, and it's often something that's only green and brown and such. So yeah. Even more exciting, I think, is this truly rare species, buttercup scorpion weed. You can see the map on the right. The most of it is in like the Potomac River area. That's the kind of concentration of the species. But you can see there's like some random populations around the eastern U.S. That map says it's not in Michigan because it was just, was it 24? I think 23 or 24. Somebody was iNaturalist. Somebody posted an iNaturalist about seeing these species, and Brad, one of my predecessors, and a phenomenal botanist, went and checked it out, and he said, "Yeah, that's exactly what it is." So we got a new globally rare species in Michigan, which is exciting. And then another email from Tony Resnicek, which was just like, "Oh yeah, we have this specimen in the herbarium that we've had in the herbarium forever, or maybe it's in a different herbarium." What does it say? At any rate, a herbarium specimen from Michigan collection from Southeast Michigan that somebody looked at again, I guess, had looked at before and looked at again, and they're like, actually, that is not the common big leaf aster. So you're probably familiar with big leaf aster. It's actually this other thing. So we have, the site where it occurs is gone, so it's automatically extinct from the state, but it's new information about the flora of the state, which I think is super exciting. So it's something to look for, though. So we never thought, generally thought to look for this species. Maybe we have it. Maybe if we looked hard enough, we'll find somewhere in southeast Michigan the Schreber's aster. So again, here is the distribution, just to bring it on home. So 77 versus 23, about 3/4 are still on the list. About a quarter of that list are off the list, of course. That's the math. And then we've added 200 some species to the list. And here are the two distributions side by side. They do suggest, a creep towards more rare species. But as I just kind of talked about, we're finding new stuff. And so at the end of the day, I think it's just exciting to look for rare plants. Hopefully you have a better understanding of what we mean when we say rare, and how the whole process works. And I want to emphasize that one of the ways the process works is people reporting things to us. Like I showed you the images of the database and all the points on the map. A ton of those points, most of those points are not us. There's only a few of us that only ever has. There's more of us now than there ever has been. We still can't keep up with. By us, I mean MNFI botanists and zoologists. We get a lot of great reports from the general public. We vet them. We make sure that they are what they say they are, but our database is full of stuff that comes from the general public, from DNR and Forest Service, et cetera, folks. So that's how the process works. Yeah.
While you're on that vein about reporting an observation,
Mhm.
I thought, look at all these people.
Yeah.
And you need more data collected. Now, we don't know what they look like, but we can do some groundwork. Are there any citizen science opportunities to join in with
I've wanted that. I've talked to other groups like ours that do it. Oh, is there a citizen science effort to coordinate the general public in doing surveys for rare species. There is not in Michigan. I would like there to be, but for effort have not for, you know. So basically the way MNFI gets funded is we develop projects with funders and they fund us to do a specific thing, or we write grants and stuff. So we don't have discretionary funding to do what we decide to do. None of us has made that a priority. We've talked about it. Wisconsin has a good program. Chicago Botanic Garden has a cool program called Plants of Concern. Wisconsin Natural Heritage, our analog in Wisconsin, has a program based on plants of concern. And I've talked to the botanist there, and he says, yeah, it's a lot of work. It's like a big chunk of his job. And so I think that's the... Yeah, but it's generally talking to the right people, I think. So yeah, but I mean, I would love that. I would love to find a more efficient way of at least coming up with a hit list or something. You know, here are the species, here's some places, but again, haven't found the way to fund that or et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Oh yeah. Right. Yeah, she's talking about iNaturalist projects, which there's a three or four different kinds of iNaturalist projects, and yeah, that's something. Yeah, exactly. That's a common topic in our. For example, we meet once a month during the non-field season with our colleagues in other states over Teams, and that we've talked about it a couple times, just trying to figure out how other groups use iNaturalist, and it's tricky. It's tricky because it's the verification is tough, and so there's not, and well, it's either you verify and it's time consuming again, or you don't verify and we just can't. Yeah, we can't use it. So yeah, but yeah, it's an option. There's ways to figure it out. Again, unfortunately, it takes time. Yeah, Steve. Oh, cool.
So all the work that was done, all the effort that was done during the 80s, 90s, 2000s, where people were choosing to plant what will be considered in some of these rare or unusual or threatened or special concern plants in and around the environment here in Michigan, locally, whatever, through greenhouses, seeds, whatever. How much that has made your work more difficult?
Thank you.
And you can be honest here. You can take it, man.
It has. It 100% has. So our role is specific, and I try to emphasize this, mostly not laser directly, but I said it a lot. Hopefully, it would what we're concerned with is species that are rare in their habitats, because once you collect the seed or whatever and plant it somewhere else, it is no longer in its habitat. It's divorced from the context where conservation is relevant. Basically, it doesn't have the same. There's lots of reasons. I'm not going to go into all the reasons now. Maybe I'll do another talk about this some other time. But yes, so what we're interested in is finding species in their own habitats, so that if somebody sends in a report that says, "Oh, I found Virginia bluebells," is a good example. People plant that in their yard all the time. Is that if you plant it in your yard, do you have a state-threatened species in your yard? No, you don't. It's your yard. It's not a natural habitat. There's more of that species in the world, but it's disconnected from its context. And I think, so we've definitely had to wade through that a little bit, and it makes it harder for some species to discern whether or not it's a record that we need to put, that we need to track, basically, because there's not, for what we do, there's not value in tracking things that are in gardens, basically. And if you and one way to think about it is, yeah, you can take it and you can put it in your yard and it can support biodiversity and it's doing a good thing, but it's not the ecosystem. We're interested in ecosystems. And so if you think about, like, you know, if you could take a Carner blue butterfly and grow it up in your yard, like, you can't do that. It's just not going to happen. But hypothetically, you'd have, it's a zoo, right? You're developing a zoo, and I, to be direct, I consider it somewhat zoo-like, which has value. And that's not what I'm saying. It has an enormous value, but it's not the same. It's not the corner of the value market that I'm focused on. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, Tom?
If I remember correctly, the Stockholm Resilience Center and its map of boundaries, the 9 systems that support life on Earth, and the one that deals with diversity, there are 2 categories: functional diversity and genetic diversity. We're way beyond the safe limit in both, but we're even farther beyond the safe limit in genetic diversity than we are in functional diversity, which suggests to me that it's not just the threatened or endangered status of the species, it's the ongoing loss of local populations that is really, in some ways, the most crucial. Is that a correct assessment?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, so you're discerning between genetic and functional diversity. So many species can serve a function of the same function. There's redundancy in terms of function in ecosystems. If you lose a species, another species can fill a function. But within each species, to make sure all those species are going to continue to the future, they need to be genetically diverse enough to produce viable, offspring for, into the future. And that is probably true for a lot more species than it looks like at first glance. And therefore, but one of the, like, I think your point there is that each individual population contributes to that. And oftentimes, I talked about range edge.
It's a measure of resilience under stress.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's like functional redundancy is resiliency under stress, but genetic diversity within a population is resiliency under stress because there's more traits and more responses to different environments to draw from. And every time you lose a little bit of that, it's again, like I was describing losing species from an ecosystem, and it's the same thing at the species level. You lose genetic diversity, you're chipping away at the resilience of that species, 100%. And so when what Wild Ones does, planting these things in their, all these species, many of the species that I've kind of referred to in this, that's preserving the genetic diversity, probably. We don't know, because we're not keeping track of it. It might be. We don't know the sources of these things, but it is holding on to it. We don't know, I don't know what we would do with it. At some point, maybe we, go through and collect seeds from a bunch of people's yards. But that's the end game, right? What I'm trying to say is, like, we need to keep these things in the places interacting with all the other organisms that they've interacted with for, we'll say, millennia. Glaciers make it weird, but at least centuries to millennia. But once you get to what Tom is talking about, like really, really focusing on the genetic diversity of a species, you're at the far end of it's about to fall off the cliff, and you got to do something. Like I showed you the picture of the Pau sheep skipperling next to the bald eagle. That's a species that's in that place. That's a species that is about to go extinct unless we do everything possible. It's in 2 places, I think, in Oakland County is where it occurs in the world, something like that. So, like, we don't want to get there with too many species. And so the holistic, if you will, way to do that is to manage things where they occur, where they know how to survive, even if you don't know how they survive. I guess it's a simpler way to do it, I think, too. Why complicate it? Because we're not that smart. Hey. Hey.
Wait.
Wait. I mean, I'll stay here for a while. You guys can feel free to disperse quietly, but if you need to disperse, but do it quietly.
Going off what Steve was talking about, so you were telling me we should kind of stay away from some of the really rare stuff in terms of like these domestic gardens, right? I mean, look at your list. Like I use, petunia and all those all the time, but you're like something like purple milkweed, like don't use that. And so why is that? Like, at what point are there's a few that we should definitely stay away from in terms of propagating?
It's more about being thoughtful about it. And I think it's one of the unintended consequences of native plant enthusiasm is it's chaotic. And it, like Steve asked the question, that's one of the reasons what Steve asked, our understanding of these species is based upon the data that literally the thing I've been talking about this whole time is the basis of our understanding is those places and what those places are, what we know about the history of those places, how they should be managed, how they were managed in the past, what they respond to. And if we're not sure if a population of one of these rare species is connected to that, if it's unclear, then we're diluting our understanding of that species and our ability to do effective conservation. And so if something, shows up in a place because it just sort of dispersed in, it may not be a viable population. It's just there for now. We don't know if it's growing there now, but if it hasn't been growing there for centuries and millennia, we don't know if that's a place that can support it, and we don't know if the conditions there are right to support it in the future. And so that's the main one, just from the data side of it, from the understanding, the science side of it, that like Steve asked a pretty good question about it.
And so, like, I don't really know of anyone doing that kind of stuff here in terms of restoration, adding rare plants, but like in the Chicago region,
Yeah.
Stephen Packard
Yeah.
always saying we should be adding rare species to, like Somme Prairie Grove. Like, where does the remnant end and the restoration begin, right?
And it's not bad either. I mean, it's like I'm not necessarily right. It's my point of view, and it's shared with a lot of people, but a bunch of really great, effective conservation-minded people like Steve Packard have taken a different view from the get-go. They made decisions. Like a person decided that this species goes here, and those places look freaking amazing. And he made some good, whatever. They're managing them too. You go to Somme Prairie Grove, it's awesome. Like it's mature, it's established. There's prairie drop seed and a bunch of the species that I showed. Probably made good decisions. Probably had a deep enough understanding of that place that, saw similar places. This is like it. This goes here.
And he's not grabbing it from like Minnesota. I mean,
Exactly.
It's like next.
He's grabbing it
next
from
door.
next door.
Right.
Exactly. So that is a big difference. We don't have a lot of next doors anymore. We've run out of next doors.
Good point.
Uh-huh.
That's a good stopping point.
Is it? Are you finished, Tyler?
Where are we stepping to?
Thank you so much. That's the time. Do we have time to take more questions?
Totally, yeah.
Does anyone have any more questions for Tyler? You guys have been asking.
Does anybody have any answers?
It's been good. I'm gonna pass it to Jen.
You may not have the, but when you're looking at the remnants that are creeping in, how much of it do you think, or is there evidence on how much of it is related to climate change and things that are south moving up, or, you know, climate, just more rain bringing other things in that aren't normally here?
It's a part of it for sure. Plants, how do plants disperse, right? How do animals disperse? Like, there's a lot of barriers at this point. Like, if you think about south to north, even from northern Indiana into southern Michigan, there's the toll road, and then there's I-94, and there's major barriers to dispersal. So even if the conditions are better, there are a lot of barriers. But things move around way more on people, I think, than whatever. We're part of nature, but like natural, non-human natural dispersal. If that does that approach your question? Or is that not exactly what you're asking? So there's not a lot getting past. I don't know. I mean, I look at that and I say that's a major, like, that's a pretty thick line, east-west line, that what crosses that line, most, a lot of, some things blow on the wind and they could jump across, some things ride on a deer or something like that, but birds, yeah. Yep. Yeah, if something's bird dispersed, then it's more likely to jump those lines. But yeah, I think certainly things are moving, but I think not linearly. They're just kind of moving everywhere, and every once in a while, a species will find itself in a place where, like, oh, this works for me now. Like, if I had gotten here 50 years ago, this wouldn't have worked for me, and now it does. But it's probably things are moving around enough that it's probably more frequent than I'm characterizing.
Yeah, I think someone had said, like, my sister was in Portland, Oregon, and was talking to somebody about native plants, and they said their opinion was that didn't make sense to plant natives because it's changing so rapidly.
Right.
So that might be just a myth, but.
Well, the concept of doesn't make sense to plant natives because the conditions won't be right for them in the future. I think, yes, that's in part true, but also the answer to that is to build resilient ecosystems and to manage resilient ecosystems and think of ecosystems and not species as much as possible. Yeah, that's my PSA. Yeah.
To your point of there's not a lot of next doors. In that case, do you advocate that we should be looking to the few next doors that do exist to begin the next stage of, if what Mike's talking about, if we are going to do restoration, if we are going to do this, then when is the time that we look at the very few next doors and take advantage of those now before they're no longer there?
Yeah, I don't know. Yes.
I mean, you advocate. I mean, is that something that you would think would be beneficial? Again, and this is, you're not representing anything else. How do you feel about that thing? If it's going to be willy-nilly, and we're going to pull seed from everywhere, which is what we did. If we could get a hold of a rare species, we'd do it. I mean, it's an opportunistic thing that happened all during that period of expansion of native plant growth and experimentation. So now, would this be maybe that's the next step, that we really look close to home and say, if genetic diversity is important, if that is something, maybe that's where we look and we use our next door rather than somebody else's. That, again, just a thought about that.
I think that's a part of it. I mean, there's don't just do one thing, I guess. I mean, the thing that maybe I'm one voice, not in the wilderness entirely, but like I'm one voice, and I'm emphasizing one approach. And I think what I'm saying is, go ahead, try those things. Don't do it at the expense of managing the things we have left, I guess is maybe more to the point. Move some seeds, do it smart. Don't like try harder to think about what you're doing, document it, make sure people know what this is, what the next door is. Like tell the story. Like, we did this. We took the seeds from this place. We put it in this place, so people understand what it is and can contextualize it that way.
But support that next door so that becomes the primary goal, and everything else from that is help, but not necessarily a substitute for
Yeah.
protecting the next door that we still have left.
Yeah, like expand out from what you have. It'll make the core remnant thing in this hypothetical more resilient. It'll increase population size. It'll buffer from surrounding degraded areas, etc. That's the theory. Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Next month, we have Heather Ratcliffe. She'll be talking about citizen activism and the wins that we had with Little Sister. And also, I want to let you know that I have printed out some cool new stickers. If anyone would like one for their vehicle, come and see me. I'm happy to give you one. And once again, let's give Tyler a big round of applause. Thank you so much.